I'm here today just to do my spoiler-free review for Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This is my first time reading through this book. The three of hers I'd read before this were Emma, Sense and Sensibility, and Pride and Prejudice. And as much as I've reread those books and adore Pride and Prejudice, I'd never really picked up much of her other works, largely because I didn't really know much about them. The people that I typically share books with and book recommendations with in my life just don't read classics, so it had never come up before. And I decided to fix that this month. It also helped that because we're in the middle of moving, I packed away the book I originally had planned for this month, and so now we're going this way. For those of you unfamiliar, Mansfield Park is the story of Fanny Price. You follow her once she was fostered by her aunt and uncle, and she lives with them and her cousins just to help her family out because her family is not as well off and have many more children. As I mentioned, it's a classic. As I also mentioned, it's a Jane Austen book, so I was prepared for a pretty good read, even if I wasn't really knowledgeable about what was going on in the story. And so with that summary kind of given to you, I'm going to move to some likes and dislikes. The first like is I loved Fanny as a character. She was very strong in her convictions, her beliefs, and her ideologies, and she stuck to them as best as she could, and it was really awesome to see somebody be strong in that way, even though overall she didn't come off like as a number of Jane Austen's other main characters do. My second like was the various relationships and shifting romances. This is something that is really common in a lot of Jane Austen stories, and I love the way that she does them, just because the interactions between all the people are just so fun to follow. And then my third like in this book is all the hot goss. It's very similar to the second like in that just there's so much going on and the way people like minimize and maximize the different things depending on their alliances and their family. It's just really, really entertaining to me for some reason, and it was no less entertaining in this book. And that's it for my likes, so I'll move to my dislikes. The first is that more in terms of pacing, this is a very slow story. A lot of Austens are not very action-filled, and they tend to have a lot of slow burn interactions and romances. However, despite a lot of her books having that more plotting pacing, I found that there were times in this story where the pacing did drag quite a bit, and as a result it ended up feeling quite a bit drier than a lot of her other books. My second dislike is a lot of the treatment of Fanny by her family. It wasn't awesome, to be honest, and I had a really, really hard time getting through some of the scenes because of how bad it got. So if you are triggered by, I wouldn't even say it was necessarily abuse, but if you're triggered by child neglect, be very careful going into this book. And then my third and final dislike that I'm going to mention here is just like the difference kind of in terms of characters in this Jane Austen book compared to some of her other works. They were a lot more dry and a lot more pious than a lot of her other characters, and as a result a lot of them weren't as fun to follow as main characters as others were. And I don't think this will be a big negative for many people. It was just something that in a lot of the other characters of hers I've read, like the main characters just had a little bit extra spark or zazz, either in their internal monologue or in how they interacted with the world, and I felt like that wasn't the same here, and so I had a lot harder time getting into the book because I had a lot harder time connecting with some of the main characters. And with that being said, I will move on to the characters. I don't have too much to say because I'll be repeating some of what I've already said in my likes and dislikes. The story and characters were very dry and almost pastoral. And although I did enjoy a lot of the differences between the different people in the cast, like you had people that were staunch of opinion, high in morality, low in morality, demure, outgoing, etc., And so there were a lot of interesting interactions. And the cast size was good. There was a lot of characters involved, but there weren't too many new characters constantly being introduced. And as a result, you weren't overwhelmed trying to keep track of the names through the entire book. Once you got introduced to them, you got to get to know them a little bit. That being said, I didn't love the characters. As I mentioned, they were a bit more dry and pastoral or pious, and so I had a hard time connecting to a lot of them. And a few of the characters that had those characteristics were more or less defined by those characteristics, and as a result, I felt were a little bit flatter, which again just made it a little bit harder for me to really get to know them. And that is all I'm going to say about characters. So I just have a short wrap up, and then that'll be it for the spoiler-free Mansfield Park review. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5. Overall, I did enjoy myself. It just wasn't my favorite, and I don't see myself rereading it the way I reread Pride and Prejudice, or even the way I reread Emma. The story overall is much drier than some of Jane Austen's other works that I've read anyways. The one thing that I really enjoy about her work is her stories are always very straightforward. There is a lot of morality, so a lot of the stories do have a more, characters with a lot more of a pious, demure, pastoral feel. But her stories are still enjoyable. There's still drama and romance, but you just mix them in with a lot of wholesome values. And so if that's something that you like about Jane Austen's stories, that is still present here. The big thing for me was that, especially Fanny, your main character, she felt a lot less self-possessed than other main characters in Jane Austen's works, and she had a little bit less sass. However, she was still strong in her own way, even if it was in a much more timid manner and much more internal manner. And so, with that out of the way, I'll leave you here. If you guys have read this and want to talk to me about it, please leave comments below. I will get back to you as quickly as I can, which is sometimes pretty quick because I've installed YouTube Studio on my phone because I want to respond to comments quickly. I'll talk to you guys there, and if not, I will see you in the next video. Peace.